If you were to ask someone who hasn't seen Berserk but has definitely heard of it what the story was all about, their answer would most likely be violence. And to a certain extent it's true. Berserk is a story that's riddled with a lot of graphic, grotesque, and sometimes gratuitous amounts of violence. But just how Game of Thrones is an anti-war story that makes its point through warfare, Berserk is really a story that depicts the tragedies that are born of violence, and nowhere does that become more clear than with these 15 characters. These are people who have lived through conditions the modern human would fail to even comprehend, and their stories show the true intentions hidden behind the violent nature of Berserk. So, without further ado, these are the top 15 most tragic Berserk characters explored. But before we jump into that, we do have a small request. If you enjoy our content, please give this video a massive thumbs up, share it with your friends, and smash that subscribe button with the notification bell turned to always while you're at it. It helps us create more higher quality content and bring in more marvelous viewers like yourself. Now, on with the list. Colette. Little girls suffering a tragic loss of innocence might feel like a little bit of a theme in the first half of this list. But Miura-san was a skilled enough mangaka to depict what feels like the same thing in half a dozen different ways, starting with the girl Colette. The first chapter of Berserk was all about showing off how Guts was on a quest where his life being at risk was the lowest bar to clear, and collateral damage was a regular part of the job. He ran roughshod over Koka both before and after his capture, and his showdown with the Snake Baron left the entire city a blasted ruin. Guts viewed people as ants, and he said that he wouldn't hesitate from crushing any ant that made the mistake of getting in his way underneath the heel of his boot. And then, in the second chapter, we were shown that underneath that black armor, there is a heart that thrums a human's beat. What's tragic is that it comes at the expense of a girl's life. In the second chapter of Berserk, titled The Brand, Guts makes his way through a forested area after parting ways with Puck. He fends off the evil spirits that make his daily life a literal nightmare, and happens across a wagon as he crosses a bridge. The wagon driver is an old priest who offers Guts shelter despite his warning that evil spirits are after him, and that's where we meet Colette. The young girl is the daughter of the priest in the manga, and she offers wine to Guts to help him warm himself from the cold he just came out of. Colette is fascinated by this hulking man and even bulkier sword with such childlike innocence that Puck couldn't help but beam at her. Although, to be fair, that could have also been the wine. Colette gives Guts a blanket as he starts to nod off, and he's about to react in his usual violent fashion, but she tells them it's to keep him comfy, and he just rolls over and goes to sleep, which is far more courtesy than he showed to Puck when the latter rescued him from a prison cell. Alas, being nice in the world of Berserk gets you nothing at best and killed at worst, and this wasn't one of Colette's better days. After drifting off to sleep, Guts is attacked by an incubus, which he manages to kill just in the nick of time. This sets off Puck like a pinball, and Colette is the first to notice all the commotion. She doesn't know how to react when Guts tells her and her father that the evil spirits he mentioned earlier were now here for him, and by the time she does, it's too late anyway. Colette gets possessed by one of the spirits, and she ends up decapitating her dad. When Guts realizes what happened, he's shocked, which allows the possessed girl to prick him with a sword. His body reacts before his mind can, and Guts bifurcates Colette with Dragon Slayer, but then pukes almost immediately out of revulsion at his own actions. Guts knows he can't help every person he comes across, but this was one line he would actively try not to cross. Colette's death was the first hint that beneath the rock-hard visage of the Black Swordsman lay a human heart. Yet the cost was just as tragic, in our opinion. Young Colette has the misfortune of joining those very dead spirits that killed her alongside her father until such a time that a mage releases their souls from their bondage. As pitiable as that might make her current existence, at least she has a way out. We can't say the same for this next entry on our list. Vargas used to be the court physician for the apostle we know as the Slug Count. He served the Count faithfully for many years, turning a blind eye to his brutality as long as he was a just ruler, which he was for most of his life. But then, a few years before the Black Swordsman arc, the Count transformed into an apostle, and his inquisition into heretics became nothing but an excuse to hunt down, violate, and devour humans. It got to a point where Vargas started fearing for his own life and that of his wife and kids, so he tried to escape the Count's castle one night. But alas, they were discovered. And what happened next would break the mind of any man, unless they were a literal psychopath. The Slug Count forced Vargas to watch as he mutilated, violated, and then ate his wife and kid. He also mutilated Vargas as well, taking both his legs, one of his eyes, several teeth, and multiple chunks of flesh off his face. Vargas wanted to be brave for his family that was being abused to death in front of him, but all he felt was crippling fear instead, and that haunts him right up until the moment he meets Guts. He managed to take the Count's behelit and escape by faking his death, but he had been looking for a way to get revenge on the Count for years in vain. That is, of course, until Guts showed up, and Vargas bet everything he had on him. He aided Guts in escaping the Count and was executed publicly for that. With his dying breath, he cursed the Count and beseeched the Black Swordsman to avenge him, which Guts does end up doing. Vargas suffered a far worse fate than Colette because, unlike her spirit, which resides in the interstice, his soul went straight to the abyss, which is Berserk's version of hell. We guess this happens because of what he did in his final moments, and we can't say watching Vargas drag the Slug Count's soul into the abyss wasn't downright cathartic, but he still had to send his soul to hell to do that, and that's not the kind of thing anyone should be aspiring for. Still, at least he has the comfort of death. The same can't be said for the girl he helped orphan. Teresia. Teresia is the second girl that Guts encounters on his journeys during the Black Swordsman arc, and we're happy to report he doesn't end up killing this one. That's progress, right? Unfortunately, that's about the only happy thing we can say about Teresia's life, because the rest of it has pretty much been spent as a prisoner. Teresia is the daughter of the Slug Count, and as the child of nobility, a certain degree of isolation from the world is to be expected. This can manifest in extreme ways that you'll see later on in the list, but Teresia didn't have a violent disposition or a disdain for the outside world, as you would expect from a sheltered child like her. Instead, the reason she's locked up in her room is because her mother died a few years ago, and her father changed that day, and ever since, he's never let her beyond her room's doors. Of course, we know that her dad became an apostle, and her mom's death wasn't exactly caused by heretics, it was the handiwork of her father, but she knows none of this. So all she wanted to do was to get outside of her little room, as she told Puck. She dreamed of going beyond the doors that confined her to her chambers, and then one day, those doors simply collapsed. Unfortunately, that was also the day that Teresia's life went from sad and miserable to angry. See, what caused her doors to cave in was her dad's fight with Guts, and the Slug Count was going all out to eliminate the Black Swordsman. This meant her dad was in his apostle form when it happened. It also meant that Teresia's worst fears about her dad were true, and that he really was a monster. She was shocked by this development, so much so that she probably didn't even notice when she went from her family castle to an interstice and became the target of the God Hand. Teresia was shown the truth about her mother's death as the God Hand tried to force the Slug Count to bargain her life for his own, and all she could do was cry as she accepted her fate. Miraculously, at the last possible femtosecond, Slug Count decided to pull through as a dad and sacrificed himself to save his daughter. This brought everyone back to the castle, and Guts saved Teresia from a cave-in, but that's where her innocence ended. She expressed a desire to kill herself, having lost everything that was dear to her. And when Guts gave her a knife to finish the job, she turned her overwhelmed emotions towards blaming him. Teresia started to believe that if Guts hadn't shown up, nothing would have happened, which is a classic case of denial rage, but the kid is beyond reasoning at this point, as Puck learns to his dismay. She vows to kill him one day, and Guts tells her to bring it on. But the frown in his face shows his regret for his actions, and the real pity is that there are no winners in this situation. We don't know if Teresia will show up again now that Studio Gaga is writing Berserk as opposed to Miura-sensei, but if she does, we can expect a rather heart-rending full-circle moment. Shiu. Sadly, neither of Guts' mothers will have a full-circle moment either, and you're about to find out why that's the case for one of them right now. The other one you gotta stick around for until the end of this video, but if you know, comment it down below. Getting back to this entry though, it's time we spoke about Shiu, the often overlooked foster mother of Guts. Shiu is introduced as a pitiable character from the get-go. She's a little unstable mentally after suffering a miscarriage, as explained by her partner Gambino, which explains why she leaves at the opportunity to nurse Guts when Gambino's mercenary crew passes by the dying baby. Shiu is presumably the one who named him, and she raised him for the first 3 years of his life before succumbing to the plague. On her deathbed, Shiu was abandoned by the man who went off to fight in a battle despite knowing her condition, but she didn't care. All she wanted was Guts to make sure he was okay, and Guts held his second mother's hand as she passed away from this world. What makes Shisu such a tragic character is that she was mistreated both in life and after death. Her relationship with Gambino wasn't exactly a healthy one. She was likely a camp follower who ended up getting pregnant by him, which culminated in a relationship. The miscarried child was most likely Gambino's, but while he kept her around after that and loved her in his own way, letting her do whatever she pleased, Gambino didn't exactly care for her. He wasn't there when she needed him the most, and he spent the rest of his own life treating her legacy, aka Guts, like a pile of dog crap. Gambino even ended up blaming Guts for Shisu's death, which is something that haunted him for a good chunk of his early life. She might not have been in the story for too long, but her impact is still being felt to this day with every swing of Guts' sword. Jill! A young girl that ended up meeting Guts underneath a tree that was used for a ritual sacrifice. Considering everything that had happened to Jill before that moment, we'd say meeting the Black Swordsman was the highlight of her life. Jill was the resident of a village near a place called the Misty Valley, and her life was miserable before meeting the Black Swordsman. She was the daughter of a retired soldier named Zepek, whose 3 favorite things in life were getting drunk, boasting about his war days whilst drunk, and beating on his wife and child whenever they pissed him off, which was, unfortunately, pretty much most of the time. The way she met Guts in chapter 95 of Berserk was that she was kidnapped from her village by a group of thugs. The thugs were going to sell her into slavery, but after they made a rest stop, one of them decided to have fun with Jill instead and started to make advances on her. The others were talking about the tree they'd taken shelter under and how it used to be a place where people would be forced to walk around the bark with their entrails nailed to it, thinking that no one was there to hear them. Guts emerges from the shadows like a black beast, takes care of the bandits, takes care of the tree, and saves the girl as well, but this begins a short association that puts Jill through all kinds of horrors. In the time that she spends with Guts, he uses her as a hostage to escape her village, she's enticed by an apostle into becoming a pseudo-apostle, and she nearly accepts because her life sucks, and then she sees Guts fighting her childhood friend / apostle in his worst mental state, and is then forced to go back home to her abusive dad after watching that same friend nearly die in her arms. Jill is put through the ringer, and she leaves the pages of Berserk with a simple vow to fight her own fight, but we know that tragic fate that awaits her. Her dad might simply beat the life out of her one day in a drunken stupor, or she might get kidnapped again, and this time Guts won't be around to save her. Jill's traumas, acquired both in the distant and recent past, are something she wants to fight through with resilience like her hero Guts, and if she manages to do it, great for her, but if she can't, we won't be surprised, and that's the real tragedy when it comes to Jill. Also, we do have one example of a possible route her life could take in that apostle friend of hers that we just mentioned. Rosine. While it's true that most apostles are evil by nature, and all apostles carry within them the essence of evil that powers their reincarnated existence, not every apostle is evil by disposition or even by choice. Case in point, Rosine, who was an adolescent child when she found her Behelit. Like her friend Jill, Rosine too came from a broken home, but hers had far more cracks in it than Jill's ever did. You see, Rosine was persecuted by her father daily for a crime she didn't even commit. The possibility that she wasn't even his biological daughter. At around the same time Rosine was conceived, her home village was raided by a group of enemy soldiers, and Rosine's mom ended up being violated by one of them. Ever since then, her father hasn't believed that she was his child, and he used to take out his anger and frustration on both Rosine and her mother. As a result of such extreme domestic conditions, Rosine started staying outdoors as much as she could and became infatuated with the local folktale of Pikaf the Outcast. The story was about a human boy that looked like an elf because he was saved from a terrifying disease at a very young age by some elves from the Misty Valley. It's actually pretty tragic because Pikaf doesn't find a place for himself among the human kids, so he tries to find the elves. He doesn't find them, comes back home, only to find his parents dead because time works differently in the Misty Valley. Rosine would often put her own twist on the tale when telling it to Jill by claiming Pikaf did find the elves, until one day she broke and started believing she was Pikaf herself. Rosine abandoned everything but her Behelit, which she took to the Misty Valley to find elves so they could rescue her from her miserable life. When they didn't show up on day 3, she gave up on her silly dream and started to go home, which is when her parents arrived. Her mom was glad to see her, but her dad was livid. He beat her so badly that Rosine bled from her mouth, and it was at this moment that she decided she didn't want to be human anymore, and the Behelit fulfilled her wish. Rosine committed numerous atrocities as an apostle, but she was a misguided child even as she did it, and that became painfully evident in her final moments, where she admitted she sacrificed her parents to gain power over Jill. Rosine is the definition of a tragic loss of innocence in our opinion, and the only apostle that can get a literal age pass for her crimes against humanity. Isma! There's a lot of people who don't like this character and think that she was a pointless addition to the main cast, especially during the Infernal Boat arc, but we actually like Isma. This girl manages to smile her way through life despite being treated like a total peacock by her island folk, and that's the level of self-love we aspire to have. Isma was introduced in chapter 311 of Berserk and is the freshest character you'll see on this list by far. After departing Vertanis Harbor and fighting off Bonebeard's pirate ship twice, Roderick's seahorse drops anchor at a tiny island in the middle of the sea. This island is home to the sea god that turned Bonebeard and his crew into tentacle things, and also Isma, a girl that is treated like the plague by the islanders. See, a long time ago, the island's humans were assisted by Meros, aka mermaids, in defeating the sea god, because despite its benevolent-sounding name, the sea god was actually a rather malevolent deity who fed on all living things in and around its vicinity. But because it's so immensely powerful as an entity, the Meros can only make it go dormant, and the islanders end up worshipping the sea god instead of the Meros because they'd rather not anger it than risk fighting it with the Meros as their allies. The reason Isma is shunned by everyone else is because she's half Mero. Her human father fell in love with her Mero mother, and she was the result. Her father died when she was very young as well, and her mom never met her until she was a teenager, so Isma grew up alone and hated by everyone she knew. Despite not understanding why she was hated, Isma bore her islanders no ill will, even weeping for some boys that used to bully her when she realized all of the people had been assimilated by the sea god. During the final confrontation with the sea god, Isma reunites with her mother and learns how to unlock her Mero transformation, which brings her immense joy. She joins the group and travels to Elfhelm, developing a budding romance with the young Isidro along the way, and things are truly happy for Isma for the first time in her life. And then she disappears from existence when Elfhelm is destroyed, taking away all of that from her and Isidro as well. We don't know whether we'll see Isma's face again in the series, and that's a tragedy because she was a drop of sunlight in an ocean of darkness. Charlotte. Princess Charlotte Beatrix Marie Roddy Winter, on paper, is the happiest woman in the world. She's the sole surviving member of the Midland royal family, currently the only kingdom in the world not entirely in shambles because of the great roar of the astral world. She's married to the man of her dreams, who happens to be Berserk's version of Jesus, and she got her orphanage proposal approved, which has her feeling rather good about herself and her capacity to do good as of late. But the moment the little princess realizes her entire reality is a fabrication, she's bound to suffer a mental break that will either leave her catatonic or Sato Takazawa levels of insane. Princess Charlotte has a tough life to begin with, as hard as that might be to believe when the word princess prefaces everything she does. She grew up as the sole heir to the throne that is central to Berserk's plotline and lost her mother at a young age. Her father remarried and she's cordial with her stepmom, but there's no warmth there. Charlotte used to be close with her dad and followed him around like his shadow when she wasn't being a recluse because he was her only surviving family member and he spoiled her silly besides. But that all ended when that same father revealed his incestuous lust for her and tried to assault her in her chambers one night. This ended up giving her PTSD, as when Emperor Ganishka tried to force himself on her later on in the series, Charlotte immediately pictured him as her dad. The only solace she found was in Griffith, who to her was a fairy tale hero. Griffith charmed the pants off her during the Golden Age arc, quite literally, and it made Charlotte more loyal to him than Donna Paulson is to Harvey Specter. Charlotte has done things for him ride or die women wouldn't, like orchestrating his escape with his band members and taking a poison dart for him. But the thing is, what she thinks is mutual love is actually one-sided. Griffith has been playing Charlotte from the moment he met her because he knows she's his quickest path to getting his own kingdom. And ironically enough, he has been proven right by the series, with Charlotte being none the wiser. She doesn't even know she's having regular intercourse with a literal demon, and we can't imagine she'll take the news with a smile and skip in her step. Charlotte's tragic past is only overshadowed by her terrifying future, which makes us pity her all the more. Judo! If there was ever a character that deserved to be alive and get everything he ever wanted, it's Judo. And the fact that Miura showed us his true feelings right before his demise is what gets him a place on our list. Judo has always been the smart, cool-headed guy in the room. He's a jack of all trades, who is one of the most important links in the chain of command of the Band of the Falcon, and while he tends to sell himself short all the time, his comrades know he's worth way more than he realizes. Judo is the one who acts like a true friend to everyone within the band, and in many ways, he was the one who kept them together. He was never cut out to be the hero of the story, and he knew that about himself, but that doesn't mean he didn't do heroic things, especially what he does in his final moments. But those moments are also what make Judo a part of this list, so let's talk about it. During the eclipse ceremony, as everyone else is being slaughtered by apostles, Judo grabs Casca and makes a run for it. Casca wants to stand and die beside her comrades, but he won't have it. The way he sees it, she was their leader now, and the leader had to survive, so he did all he could to save her. Judo was attacked by multiple apostles in the process and ended up losing his life. But turns out what was motivating him was something more than just loyalty. It was love. Judo loved Casca, and that made him want to save her that much more. This is tragic because, like always, Judo overlooked his own feelings and encouraged someone else to do what he wanted to do. And now he would never get a chance to say the one thing he wanted to say to Casca all the time, ever again. We know Guts and Casca are the OG ship of Berserk, but Judo was our guy, and seeing him lose everything for literally no reason hurt more than it should have. If his death was a massive 10-pound poop cake, then him not getting the girl was the tragic cherry on top. And there's no denying that. But you can fight us down in the comments section if you disagree. Farness. Another noblewoman like Charlotte who grew up in a powerful family, Farness was the one we were referring to in Teresia's section when we said at least she didn't grow up with violent tendencies, because god damn does this girl have some issues after growing up. As the only daughter of the richest family in all Holy See territories, Farness was destined to become a pawn in her father's political games. But what made her wonky in her early years wasn't that traditional expectation, it was familial expectation. Despite having 3 brothers, a father, and a mother, Farness grew up almost entirely alone in her family mansion. Everyone else was too busy to spend time with her, so Farness cherished the time they spent together like it was a sacred treasure. The one time her family took a vacation together, her dad bought her a teddy bear, and it became her prized possession. Farness would cling to it like it was her life. But then, a few years later, her dad made her throw it away because it looked raggedy, and she agreed because she rarely spoke with him as it is, but it killed her on the inside. Federico Vandimian might have run the biggest bank on the western shores, but he was a terrible father. And the absence of family made Farness act out erratically and violently as a youth. She ended up becoming a pyrophilic sadist and a religious fanatic as a coping mechanism, which is downright horrid to think of even as we say it. After meeting Guts, Farness' worldview was shattered, and to say she took it horribly at first would be an understatement. But as she spent more time with him, she reformed herself and has since become a prodigious mage. Despite only having a few weeks of practice, Farness can cast a better formation of the 4 than Elfhelm mages who have trained for years. But she's still prone to falling into her old habits, and that makes us feel for the girl. When the gang got to Britannis, Farness tried to get a ship to help her friends, but ended up agreeing to a betrothal and staying for a ball instead, just like the old days. She broke out of that mindset when Guts & Co. arrived at Vandimian Mansion to rescue her, but she's still prone to breaking down upon receiving praise. Farness' self-concept is still extremely fragile, and her conflicting feelings towards Guts and Casca's relationship doesn't really help. She's been praised by one of the greatest mages in Elfhelm, Guru Gedfring himself, but she still lacks the confidence to think she can handle things herself while Shirke takes the world spiral tree to Falconia. Well, she needs to get over herself and quick, because as things stand in the manga right now, Guts might go berserk at any second, and Farness could be the only one who can stop him. If she doesn't believe in herself now, all her progress will have been for nothing, and the tragedy we'll end up associating with her will be far more brutal than personal. Egg of the perfect world. Imagine you lived your entire life as a nobody, not as somebody that nobody seems to care about too much, but a literal nobody. You had no name, you had no family, you lived amongst rats and ate refuse for a living. When you cried, there was no one to hold you, and when you smiled, there was no one to see you. All you had were people who saw you as a freak, who pointed at you like you were some wild animal and threw refuse at you to make you go away, who threw corpses in your home, not knowing you lived there, but burying you all the same because who cares about nobody? Would you not then sacrifice a world like that in a heartbeat if someone told you that you could bring about a new world without such suffering? If your answer is yes, then you, my friend, have the same resistance to pity as the egg of the perfect world, and we don't exactly know if we can cheer you on in your vision quest. On one hand, the egg of the perfect world is single-handedly responsible for bringing Femto into the physical world in his previous human form as Griffith. He fell for the God Hand's guilt-tripping routine and orchestrated all the events that transpired during the conviction arc. He personally became the cocoon from which Femto then emerged. But on the other hand, his life has taught him that there was no other way to make the world a better place, and finding the fault in his logic is extremely difficult because his lived experience was indisputable. The egg of the perfect world was treated like an animal when he was just a human being, and this is at least one tragedy that the series actually somewhat resolves. At one point during the conviction arc, the egg kidnaps best girl Luca, brings her to his lair, and just dumps his history on her. He does it so someone would remember him for who he was and not what he did, and Luca does. After Griffith's incarnation, Luca flies a flower in the egg's memory, and she does it regardless of the fact that it was what caused everything in St. Albion. But she can't undo what the egg inadvertently ended up doing to our next entry, which is the Demon Child. One of the saddest characters in all of Berserk has to be Guts and Casca's Demon Child. Conceived on the night they consummated their love and defiled on the night they lost all their friends and all sense of normalcy, the Demon Child had it rough quite literally from the beginning. Neither Guts nor Casca knew about the later's pregnancy, so when she gave birth 4 days after the eclipse, Guts' immediate reaction was this was probably some apostle's demon spawn. But then Casca moved to protect the kid from Guts, and it tried to reach out to him, and his skeletal struggler pal made him realize that this was actually his kid corrupted by the demonic seed of Femto. Despite discovering that the Demon Child was his own flesh and blood, Guts tried to kill it, and he tries to kill it every time it shows up during his time as the Black Swordsman. When your dad's trying to do that to you and you only have your mom to run to for protection, your life is going to be a pretty turbulent plane ride. And a turbulent plane ride is a mild comparison for what the Demon Child has gone through. Despite being hated by Guts, the Demon Child always tries to warn him of major troubles, like Casca getting kidnapped by Mozgus during the conviction arc whilst dodging all of his attacks. During the arc itself, the Demon Child spends all its energy protecting Casca from crazy heretics, undead flesh-eating blobs of blood, and flames being spit from a mad priest's mouth. The Demon Child, on the verge of death, is then found and eaten by the egg of the perfect world and incorporated within Griffith's new body, where he now manifests every full moon as the Moonlight Boy. What makes things even more tragic is with every passing day, it looks more likely that killing the Moonlight Boy might be the only way to kill Griffith for good, because while his own body has been manifested from the blood and souls of thousands of people, and the reincarnation vessel that was the apostle body of the egg of the perfect world, the Demon Child's body is part flesh, which makes Griffith mortal in his Moonlight Boy form. If Guts has to do what Gambino tried to do to him, well, then things will come full circle for him with at least one parental sphere of life, as horrifying as that is. Skull Knight. People who hold grudges for a long time tend to be viewed as crazy, but you have to be insane to hold onto a grudge for 1,000 years and still only just start figuring out how to take care of business. Yet, that's the life of the Skull Knight, and it's downright tragic. In his human life, the Skull Knight was the illustrious King Geiseric, only person to rule the entire continent of man and the progenitor of the Kingdom of Midland's royal bloodline. If you're wondering whether that's confirmed or not, you can check out all our content on Skull Knight and King Geiseric by heading over to our Berserk playlist and then coming back here to tell us we were right. Go on, we're patient, we can wait. But getting back to the Skull Knight, the reason Geiseric became the skeletal warrior we know him as today is because he died wearing the Berserker armor with his lover in his arms, during what is quite possibly the first canonical eclipse in the Berserkverse. Once he died, his soul, whose last thoughts were focused on vengeance on the God Hand, was transferred to his current skeletal armor, which he uses to carry on as a literal wandering wraith. The Skull Knight muses about his own existence on several occasions, and you can really feel the melancholy pouring out of him in those moments. This is a guy who literally died driven by rage and bloodlust. He's driven by those same emotions even now, and he's still holding on to that same grudge grudge from 1,000 years ago. In fact, it's the only thing he remembers anymore, as he says himself, but he doesn't feel love or hate, only a burning anger for retribution against the Inhumans. It's implied in the manga that the Flower Storm monarch Danon is a reincarnation of Skull Knight's lover from his Geiseric days. The two look the same, as Guts and Shirke point out, and Geiseric's lover had Flora as one of her disciples. Flora and SK are close friends, and Flora was expelled from Elfhelm for violating a taboo around the same time Geiseric's empire fell. Assuming Danon is Geiseric's old lover reincarnated, the scene in chapter 363 where she asks him why he's visiting her human grave takes on an extra shade of Shakespearean tragedy. Two lovers in two different bodies in a generation a millennium away from their own. Skull Knight's past and present are a constant reminder of his eternal struggle, and while he is a particularly badass individual, it's hard not to look at him with sadness in our eyes. But even Hamlet can't touch the next two people on our list. Casca. When Casca was introduced to the story, we knew two things about her for sure. Number one, she worshipped Griffith, and number two, she hated Guts. We'd say it's funny how that dynamic is now completely reversed, except we'd be horrible for saying that, because god damn it, Miura put Casca through the wood chipper of life. Casca's had it rough ever since she was young. She was the youngest child of an impoverished family, and she was sold to a nobleman as a means of getting rid of an extra mouth to feed. Casca would have been okay with the deal had the noble who bought her not tried to assault her the first moment he could, but Casca was saved by Griffith, and she dedicated her entire life to becoming his sword from that moment onward. Casca became his second in command, and the second best fighter in the entire Band of the Falcon, because she knew she needed to keep up as a woman, but more than that, she was hoping to win Griffith's love organically. When Charlotte's entry into the equation made it clear that that wasn't going to happen, she realized she'd fallen for Guts instead, and their romance is the reason hardcore Berserk fans will still insist Berserk is a love story. But then, her idol and hero violated her and mutated her baby for no other reason than to spite Guts, and it broke Casca's mind in a way that she still hasn't recovered from to this day. Even after coming out of the Corridor of Dreams, Casca was prone to PTSD flashbacks to the eclipse whenever she saw Guts. Though to be fair, that could also be because Guts once nearly did the same thing as Griffith to her, and that could just be her mind equating the act itself with the eclipse. And now that she's in Falconia under some kind of trance, there's no telling what her mental state is going to be like by the end of this. Casca simply can't catch a break, and if the Moonlight Boy thing comes true, well, then our pity just becomes absolutely bottomless for her. Casca was a strong, beautiful, independent warrior woman who was reduced to a shell of her former self because of one man's ego, and it breaks our heart a little every time we see her now. Still, despite all that, she has nothing on our main man. This guy single-handedly redefined the meaning of the word struggler in the English dictionary. Seriously, look it up, you'll find Guts from Berserk written there. Jokes aside, if Casca is the Hamlet of Berserk, then Guts is the whole damn genre of Shakespearean tragedy. He was born from his mother's hanging corpse and raised by a mercenary who sold him for sex one night, which ended up giving him nightmares and intimacy issues for years. That same guy tried to get him killed by throwing him into the front lines or into decoy units all the time during his childhood, but Guts always managed to survive. So, Gambino decided to take a direct approach, but that ended up getting him killed and leaving Guts with a lot of guilt about killing his father when he was really just defending himself. Then the eclipse happens, and it creates a malignant tumor called Malice within Guts' heart, which manifests itself as his beast of darkness. Understand that Guts didn't assault Casca because he wanted to. Unlike Griffith, he literally had a psychotic break and fell under the influence of his inner darkness. As soon as he snapped back to reality, he crawled away from Casca and accepted help to ensure that it would never happen again. And turns out it can never happen again because Casca will literally pass out even if she sees him with her newly healed mind. And all this time, Guts has been fighting with the Berserker armor on him, which is legitimately like throwing hot oil on a burning stove and hoping it's going to put out the fire. The thing that makes Berserk such a compelling tale is the complicated web of emotions that lie within Guts, chief of which is his tragic sense of loss. Guts always worries about how he sees irreplaceable things only after he leaves them, which is why he was determined to save Casca and never be separated from her ever again after he realized she was missing. Guts kept his word and kept her safe from everything, including himself, except that one time we just talked about. But all his restraint and all his self-control has brought him only more woe, and now Casca is in Griffith's hand and he doesn't know what to do about it or where to even begin. For the first time, Guts is completely helpless, and you can really feel that in chapters 370 and 371. Yes, Guts is a badass who eats apostles for breakfast and drinks evil spirits for protein, but he's also a man that is barely holding it together at any given time. And that's what makes us feel really sorry for him every time we see him. Guts is the personification of a tragic hero in the manga industry, and you're free to debate us about that down in the comments section down below. Marvelous verdict. But as for this video, we're afraid that's all we've got. Did you guys enjoy the video? If so, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep on struggling, strugglers.